We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. 12 months ago I asked the Prime Minister, was he adding 1.5 million people from overseas during a rental and housing crisis and a cost of living challenge? The Prime Minister denied that that was the case. Tuesday's budget revealed these problems have only worsened, and now around 1.7 million people are coming into our country when building activity is at an 11-year low. Will the Prime Minister admit that his weak leadership and bad decisions over 3 budgets have made it harder for Australians to buy or to rent a home?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Of course, we inherited a broken migration system from those opposites. And the migration system
Minister for Home Affairs
that the Leader of the Opposition talks about is under the system that he presided over. What we are doing is fixing the system. In the words of Dr Parkinson, who did the review, this is a 10-year rebuild. This is not something you do quickly because it is so badly broken. It was a deliberate decision to neglect the system. We had also the report from Christine Nixon, who found that systemic failures in the visa system under the Leader of the Opposition's watch paved the way for foreign organised crime syndicates, including the Albanian Mafia, to infiltrate the country and engage in illicit activities such as drug trafficking, money laundering, violence, modern slavery, sexual exploitation and corruption. The former Deputy Secretary of the Immigration Department indeed found that Abdul Rizvi, in total there were between 100,000 and 120,000 asylum applications
Prime
lodged.
Minister, just will pause. I heard what the Leader of the Opposition was interjecting then. The Prime Minister, I'm listening carefully, is reading direct reports regarding the question he was asked at, and these reports are recent reports. They're not something to do with the comparison. So just ask the Prime Minister to be heard in silence.
Mr Speaker, in total there were between 100,000 and 120,000 asylum applications lodged while Dutton was in charge. This is by far the largest number of asylum applications under any immigration minister in our history. Dennis Richardson also did a review, the former ASIO Director-General, someone who's widely respected.
Minister will pause. The member for Moreton will cease interjecting. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition has the call on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The question was about the migration intake and housing for Australians. Can the Prime Minister defend what was in his budget last night? Or is it...
Order. No. I'm listening extremely carefully to the Prime Minister on this one, trust me. He is reading from direct reports from different reviews regarding the question he was asked about the decisions that he has taken. So that was the question, part of the question as well. So of course he's going to be directly relevant. If he was reading a report from 20 years ago, if he was reading a report from 5 years ago, he wouldn't be relevant because he's being asked about decisions that have been taken. If he strays into territory regarding comparisons or contrast, he won't be able to do that because the question was specific about the decisions that the government's taken. On the further point of order.
Well, to your ruling, Mr Speaker, the question was, will the Prime Minister admit that his weak leadership and bad decisions over 3 budgets have made it harder for Australians to buy or rent a home? How can he be in order when he has no relevance to that question?
I'll tell you how it's being relevant, because he was asked also about the 12 months remarks that he made in your first part of the question, and I just want to repeat to the Leader of the Opposition, it's not an opportunity to repeat the question. So the Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm proud of the time when I was a minister in the past, and it's no wonder that the Leader of the Opposition is embarrassed by his performance. Dennis Richardson said this. Order. He spoke about a lack of proper due diligence, resulting in public money being handed to individuals and businesses suspected of seeking to circumvent US sanctions against Iran, money laundering, bribery, drugs and arms smuggling into Australia and corruption. Now, we inherited a broken migration system and we're working to fix it. Under our government, net overseas migration is on track to halve next year. We've announced we will limit international student numbers. At the same time, we know that we have skills shortages in our economy, so we're ensuring that our migration settings are meeting Australia's needs in areas like nursing, aged care and construction. The opposition should be clear about where their cuts will come from and what it means for business and for our economy.
Give the call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the budget tackling the challenges we face today while building for a better future? Is there anything standing in the way of making our future here?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question. And indeed, our budget on Tuesday night was about helping people with their cost of living in a way that doesn't add to inflation, but also about making our future here in Australia. It's a budget for every Australian, not just some. Tax cuts for every single taxpayer, not just some. Energy price relief for every household, not just some. Stronger Medicare in every single community. More homes right around the country. A better deal for every working parent with paid parental leave. More help for households who are doing it tough. But we're also, while we're dealing with the immediate challenges, looking to the future. What does the economy look like due to the global changes that are occurring, and how do we set Australia up for success? And we do that by making more things here in Australia, making sure that we take advantage of the opportunities which are there. Now, for 2 years, they've said no to everything, those opposite. No to cheaper medicines, no to helping people with their power bills, no to tax cuts for every taxpayer. And on budget night this year, they said immediately, it didn't take them long, they haven't seen the legislation yet, but they're saying no to making more things here in Australia. They're saying no to Australian jobs. They're saying no to Australian ingenuity. They're saying we should just export resources, wait for someone else to value add, and then import it back. Import it back once the value has been added. Now, they are a government, of course. They were a government that told the car industry to bugger off. They just told them to leave. And they got the message and they left. But, of course, when the car industry left, it wasn't just the people who were working in that industry. It's the multiplier impact. Just like making more things here in Australia will have a multiplier impact. They drove the car industry out because they didn't want things built in Australia then, and they don't believe we can do it now. The same mob, the same coalition mentality that has built trains that don't fit on stations, that are the wrong gauge, that don't work, ferries that can't fit under bridges. They say we can't do it. Well, we have faith in the Australian people and in Australian workers and in Australian businesses. And that's why Tuesday's budget will back them.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The chant from the river to the sea demands the destruction of the Jewish state. The Prime Minister has said it's both violent and incompatible with peace. But Labor Senator Fatima Payman has accused the Prime Minister of defending the oppressor's right to oppress and repeated the chant. Will the Prime Minister show strong, not weak leadership and remove Senator Payman from the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. I thank the member for his question. I thank him for his principled leadership on a range of issues when it comes to race issues. The principled issue that stance that he took, which is why he now sits where he does rather than down the front, which showed courage. I'm not quite sure why that is somehow controversial. I'm being.
Order. The member for Barker. Order. The member for Barara was heard in silence and given courtesy and respect. Just asking a little bit shown to the Prime Minister. It will be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I praised him due to his principled stance there, and I praise him for the principled stance that he has taken about the rise in anti-Semitism. It has been my privilege to stand with the member for Barara in my own electorate at the Exodus Foundation and speak about the need to bring the country together, to reconcile with our past and to celebrate our multiculturalism here. The chant "From the river to the sea" has been used from time to time by some in the pro-Palestinian movement, by some who argue that Israel should be just one state as well and that Gaza and West Bank should be wiped out. It is inappropriate. I very strongly believe in a two-state solution. I strongly believe in the right of Israel to exist within secure borders. I strongly believe as well in the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. What we need to do, and why Australia voted in the United Nations as we did last Friday, was to join other nations, including the New Zealand, and I pay tribute to Prime Minister Luxon, to join with Japan and Korea and ASEAN nations, to say that—
Order. Prime Minister will pause, and I'll hear from the member for Barara.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, this is a question about the Prime Minister's actions in relation to Senator Payman's statements yesterday. We haven't heard anything about that yet.
The Prime Minister is referring to topics of the question, but I will ask him to, for the remainder of his answer for the minute, to make sure he is directly relevant to the question.
I've said very clearly that that slogan that calls for a single state is not appropriate.
Order.
Is not appropriate. I believe very strongly that—
Order. Members have got to cease interjecting for the remainder of this answer, otherwise they won't be here.
I believe very strongly that the world has an opportunity to— often there is a saying that a time of war is the best time to talk about peace. We have an opportunity to take forward the resolution that is required, which does require a two-state solution. We continue to express our unequivocal opposition to the terrorist actions of Hamas on October 7. We continue to call for a release of hostages. We continue to call for a humanitarian ceasefire and for humanitarian aid to be given to the people of Gaza. We continue to call for a two-state solution where both Israelis and Palestinians can live in—
Order. The House comes to order. We hear from the member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How does the responsible economic management at the core of this week's budget compare with the situation Labor inherited? And what approaches has the government rejected?
We call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the question from the member for Chisholm. Already more questions to me with that one question than from the Shadow Treasurer in Budget Week. Mr Speaker, in the member for Chisholm's electorate, every one of the 81,000 taxpayers will get a tax cut, and every one of the 75,000 households will get energy bill relief. And that's because, as the Prime Minister said a moment ago, the cost of living relief in the budget is substantial and it is responsible. And it shows, Mr Speaker, that responsible economic management is a defining feature of the government that this Prime Minister leads, and it was a defining feature of the budget on Tuesday night as well, Mr Speaker. And you see that in so many of the numbers which compare the situation that we inherited with the situation in the budget 2 years into our government. Mr Speaker, we have been turning Liberal deficits into Labor surpluses. Last year we turned a $78 billion deficit into a $22 billion surplus. This year we're turning a $56 billion deficit into a $9 billion surplus. Next year, turning a $47 billion deficit into a deficit which is $19 billion better than what we inherited from those opposite. Gross debt will peak 10 percentage points lower because of our responsible economic management. That will help us avoid $80 billion in interest costs that those opposite tried to lumber us with, Mr Speaker. Under this government, we've banked 82% of the upward revisions to revenue versus 40% under those opposite. Our real spending growth, 1.4% compared to 4.1% under those opposite. And, Mr Speaker, our responsible approach is one of the reasons why the inflation that we inherited with a 6 in front of it now has a 3 in front of it and is heading towards having a 2 in front of it, Mr Speaker. Wages growth is almost double on our watch than it was under those opposite. Real wages were falling 3.4% when we came to office. They're now growing again for the first time in years. And today we got another unemployment number, Mr Speaker, which showed that 820,000 jobs, and most of them full-time, have been created on this Prime Minister and this government's watch, Mr Speaker, and that is an important thing as well, Mr Speaker. So we've been managing the economy in a methodical and a balanced and a cohesive way, Mr Speaker, and tonight, in contrast, we will hear from the divisive leader of a divided party. They are all over the shop on nuclear, on tax breaks for the industries which will power our future, and on housing. That coalition clown show of incompetence and incoherence has learned nothing from its time in office, Mr Speaker, when wages were stagnant and rorts and debts piled up and Middle Australia didn't get a look in. Well, no matter what he says tonight, Mr Speaker, we already know his nuclear negativity is no substitute for economic credibility.
Order. Give a call to the honourable member for Griffith.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns the government's capital gains tax discount for landlords. If we take a landlord, let's call him Anthony, he can increase the rent by however much he wants and evict his tenant so he can sell the property for a big profit. When selling the property, he gets to keep 50% of a $500,000 profit he makes completely tax-free, thanks to Labor's handouts to property investors.
Order. There's far too much noise. I can't hear the question. Order. The Minister for the Environment is not helping things. Order. Every member deserves to be heard in silence with their questions, and that's right across the chamber. Out of respect for the member for Griffith, he'll begin his question again.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister and concerns the government's capital gains tax discount for landlords. If we take a landlord, let's call him Anthony, he can increase the rent by however much he wants and evict his tenant so he can sell the property for a big profit. When selling the property, he can get to keep 50% of a $500,000 profit he makes completely tax-free, thanks to Labor's handouts to property investors, which deny renters the ability to buy their first home. Does the Prime Minister think that's more than fair?
Order. The member for McEwen will cease interjecting. The Treasurer has the call.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the member for Griffith for his question about tax policy and housing policy. One of the things that we are proudest of about the budget that we handed down from this dispatch box on Tuesday night were the billions of dollars in new investments in housing. And that's because we recognise, Mr Speaker, that the housing pipeline that we inherited after 10 years of neglect needs our urgent attention. It's receiving our urgent attention. But more than that, it is receiving $32 billion in investment, including $6 billion new dollars of investment in the budget on Tuesday night. And for this I pay tribute to the Minister for Housing and to the government for the way that we have made building more homes for Australians a central economic priority of this government and this budget, Mr Speaker. And we don't ask for much, Mr Speaker. We ask for the parliament to support our efforts. And when we desperately needed those opposite to vote for more housing, and when we need—
Order. The Treasurer will just pause so I can hear from the member for Griffith on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. It's on relevance. The question went specifically to the capital gains tax discount, and the Treasurer hasn't addressed it at all.
Yes, he has. Order. Just on the point of order, member, he has 3 minutes to address. There's not a time factor when he has to address all aspects, or he doesn't have to address all aspects. He's got to be directly relevant to the topic. I'm just going to ask him to return to the question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker. A question about housing policy and tax policy. I'll deal with the housing policy first and I'll come to the tax part of it in a minute, Mr Speaker. We're very proud of the investments we're making in housing. And the difference between this side of the House and that side of the House is we want to build homes and they want to wreck super. That's the difference. That's the difference. In the big parties in the parliament, the big clash of ideas in this parliament, we want to build more homes and they want to wreck super. Mr Speaker, that's the difference. And we'll hear more of that rubbish tonight about raiding people's superannuation as a substitute for the decent, methodical housing policy that this minister and this government is putting in place, something that we're very proud of. Now, Mr Speaker, in addition to asking about housing policy, the honourable member also asks about tax policy, and there is a change in the budget to capital gains tax. And the change in the budget for capital gains tax, which will raise more than $500 million, is to align the capital gains treatment for foreigners with the capital gains treatment for Australians. And this is one of the ways that we are methodically, in a considered way, repairing the tax base so that we can fund important things like cost of living help and strengthening Medicare and reforming our universities and investing in more skills to build the future, to build a future made in Australia. So there's tax reform in the budget, capital gains tax reform in the budget. There's a massive investment in housing because this government, rather than just playing a dodgy dog whistles like this opposition leader does, rather than the clumsy cliches that we'll hear from the opposition leader tonight, rather than their efforts to wreck super and versus our efforts to build more homes, we've got a housing policy that we are proud of. They will play their usual nasty negative politics about it.
Give a call to the honourable member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. What progress has there been on fuel efficiency standards? Why is this important? And what arguments did the government reject?
Give a call to the order. Order. I haven't called the minister. Give a call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, of course, earlier today the House passed the Albanese Labor government's new vehicle efficiency standards. A standard that is right for Australia and has been developed with Australian car users in mind. A standard that will deliver Australians a choice of more cars, whether they are petrol, whether they are diesel, whether they are hybrid or electric. A standard that will save Australians thousands of dollars at the Bowser, and a standard that is well past its time to actually be delivered in this country. A standard that, of course, will also reduce emissions. A standard that will ensure Australians can continue to buy the utes and the SUVs that they love. We have consulted very closely with the car manufacturers, the dealer representatives and climate groups to ensure that all views were considered in this standard. The legislation is widely supported by a range of stakeholders. The reality is that this is a policy the opposition had promised for decades, yet failed themselves to deliver. It's a policy that the member for Bradfield tried and failed to deliver, but had not done. We have had to do the hard work that he could not. Under this reform, people will still be able to buy whatever car they want that suits them and their families, just as they can overseas. This is about making cars more efficient right across the board, whether they're petrol, diesel, hybrid or an EV. This is an important reform for the nation, and I must say there has been a lot of misinformation and mistruth regarding this reform, so let me clear some of that up. First, that this would increase prices and reduce choice for consumers, and that somehow we would be killing the ute. That is simply untrue. As we know, the member for Bradfield said when fuel efficiency standards were introduced in the US, the most popular models before introduction stayed the most popular models after introduction, what we call utes. There was not a material change in price, and we don't expect there to be a material change in price here. It was true when the member for Bradfield said it, and it is true today. What the modelling actually shows is that this standard will bring more choices of more modern vehicles into the Australian market and save Australians $1,000 a year on the average in fuel costs. And I hear the interjections over the opposite about debate. You dealt yourself out of this debate decades ago. You dealt yourself out of this debate when you said before you had even seen the legislation that you would be voting against it. You didn't want to debate this legislation. You wanted to grandstand. That's what you wanted to do, and continue to spread misinformation to regional communities who will save thousands of dollars at the petrol bowser as a result of this government's decisions.
Time has concluded. Member for Herbert ceases objecting. Give a call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Labor's third budget is the wrong budget for Australia. Economist Stephen Hamilton called it downright reckless. Economist Paul Bloxham said budget measures support underlying inflation rather than lowering it. Sherelle Murphy from EY said we were left disappointed. Why are Australians paying the price for this Prime Minister's wrong priorities and bad decisions?
Order. Call to the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the leader of the economic dream team from those opposite, but his partner, the Shadow Finance Minister, had this to say about our budget. I'm sure Australians that are doing it tough right now will be thrilled to hear that there's something in this budget for them. She went on to say, just the day after the budget, just yesterday, everybody needs $300 off their power bill. In fact, we'd like to see more. So they come in here and they say, oh no, it's all bad. They voted against power bill relief when it was going targeted in a targeted fashion. They've opposed those who are getting it in a more broader sense. Just like on tax policy, they opposed, of course, our changes and said they'd reverse the changes to give every taxpayer a tax cut. And then the Leader of the Opposition said that we should go to an election on it. Go to an election on it. Well, I await tonight the Leader of the Opposition saying that he'll jack up that first rate from 16 cents back up to 19 cents, that he will reduce the amount in which the top rate cuts in from $190 down to $180,000.
The Prime Minister will pause. Prime Minister will pause. The member for order. The Leader of the House. The Treasurer will cease ejecting. Any member can raise a point of order. One point of order of relevance can be done, and that is what the member for Hume is doing. So he'll be heard in silence.
Mr Speaker, the question referred to three economists who have all said that this budget has failed the Australian people. He is not talking about this budget, Mr Speaker. He's talking about something else entirely.
Resume your seat. I don't know what the quotes. Order. I don't know what the quotes were. You're right. He's referring to the question contained quotes, and content at the end of the question was why are Australians paying the price for this government's wrong priorities. I'm assuming that the Prime Minister doesn't agree with that premise, and he's arguing why, and he's delivering quotes to support that. You just said the question did contain quotes, so I don't know what those quotes were. So if it's context you're after, the Prime Minister is answering the end part of the actual question regarding information, regarding the budget. It was such a broad question at the end, he's entitled to do that. I think everyone can agree on that. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I was asked about the commentating on our budget, and I went to quotes from the Shadow Finance Minister, and the Shadow Treasurer got up and complained and said that wasn't relevant. What a team they have. What a team, eh? They can't decide where the nuclear reactors will be. This bloke was out there on Sunday opposing his own leader on it.
The Prime Minister will return to the question.
Well, here's what the Business Council of Australia had to say. Bren Black. There are some helpful wins for business in this budget, with BCA recommendations accepted, including a single front door to fast-track investment, a strong focus on skills and production tax credits for hydrogen and critical minerals projects. He went on to say, We called for an Australian response to the US Inflation Reduction Act and a targeted investment allowance to support the net zero transition, which we have secured here. Aki, Andrew McKellar, the government's commitment to reforming Australia's skills system is welcomed by business. We are also pleased with the investments in growing the construction workforce. The Minerals Council of Australia has come out and backed it. The Australian Retailers Association, Australian Industry Group, Housing Industry Association, all of these groups coming out and applauding our budget.
Has concluded. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Before I call the member for Corangamite, I'm pleased to inform that in the gallery today are students from Christian College in her electorate. Give a call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. What is the Albanese Labor government's approach to energy policy? And what policies have been rejected, and why is it important to be upfront with the Australian people about energy policy?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for her question. And she asked about what energy policy we are implementing and what energy policy we are rejecting. Well, we are implementing the energy policy we told the Australian people about before the election, and in no small part the then Leader of the Opposition told the Australian people about in his budget replies. In the now Prime Minister's first budget reply, he announced the Rewiring the Nation policy on behalf of the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. In the now Prime Minister's second budget reply, he announced new energy apprentices, which are now being implemented very well by the Skills Minister to ensure that we have the apprenticeships to power our energy transformation. And by the time of the then Leader of the Opposition's third budget reply, our energy policy had all been released. We'd already released the Powering Australia policy, Mr Speaker, by the time of the Leader of the Opposition's third budget reply. Now, the current Leader of the Opposition has his third budget reply tonight. So we have the opportunity, to hear from the Leader of the Opposition about his energy policy, and we reject risky nuclear reactors, and we adopt and endorse reliable renewables, Mr Speaker. And if the Leader of the Opposition is so proud of his nuclear policy, perhaps he could announce it tonight. Now, I understand his sensitivity. He might be worried about the reaction in the House, not so much from this side of the House, but from that side of the House, because the Leader of the Opposition hasn't split the atom, but he has split his party room, Mr Speaker. He has managed to split his party room. We've had those brave individuals, those dozen coalition MPs who want nuclear, as long as it's not in their electorates, Mr Speaker, those conviction politicians who support nuclear policy, as long as it's not in their backyard. We've seen other reporting of the views of the coalition party room. The Daily Telegraph reported that a backbench coalition MP described the policy, and I quote, as madness on steroids. So there's an endorsement for you. The Fin has reported, and I quote, a sudden sense of bewilderment within the coalition about nuclear policy, Mr Speaker. So the coalition is bewildered about nuclear policy, about their own policy. The coalition is bewildered about coalition policy. They really are slow-moving bewildered beasts over there, Mr Speaker. Sometimes they're bewildered about their own policy. The same report said coalition MPs were calling their own policy bonkers. So this is going to go swimmingly tonight, I reckon, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition. It's just going to go very, very well. It has been absolute scenes in the coalition about this policy, absolute scenes of disunity. The Shadow Minister has gone very quiet for a change. We don't hear so much from him. Oh, here he goes. Here we go. We've got him. We've got a live one, Mr Speaker. The member for Fairfax has perked up. Well, perhaps he'll perk up tonight and actually announce a policy.
Order. The Minister's time has concluded and the member for Fairfax's time has almost concluded. So he'll cease interjecting. The member for Wannon has the call.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. The Albanese government's first budget forecast net overseas migration of 235,000 people in 22-23. In this week's budget, it was revealed that 22-23 net overseas migration was 528,000. Labor forecast missed the mark by 293,000. How can the Australian people believe any forecast this government makes on net overseas migration?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question because the system that we inherited was broken. We say that is the case. That's why we're setting about fixing it. We're on track to halve it next year.
Order.
We've announced we'll limit our international student numbers. At the same time, we do know that we have skills shortages in our economy, and we're dealing with it. But we inherited a system that was simply broken. And indeed, the member himself, of course, as we know, said at one stage, when he was responsible as the Education Minister, help us spread the word about studying here to help us overtake the United Kingdom as the world's second most popular study destination. Now, the Leader of the Opposition's been out there today talking about reducing the number of students coming here, but he was busy talking it up when he was in government, as was the then Minister for Education. The hypocrisy is writ large. It's their system that we inherited. We're fixing it.
Order. Give a call to the honourable member for Cornwall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How is the Albanese Labor government backing science and industry in this budget to deliver a future made in Australia, and what is standing in its way?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science. Order.
Thanks, Speaker. I also want to thank the member for their question and their long-standing support for Australian manufacturing, because, like everyone on our side, they know the importance of science and industry working together. Great Aussie ideas that create great products and great jobs. And yet too often our world-leading know-how goes offshore to create jobs in other countries. Right. And we're left importing products that should be stamped made in Australia. Why is it that we import 99% of solar panels that were invented right here at the Uni of New South Wales? Why is it that Gardasil, the cervical cancer vaccine, is made elsewhere when it was invented at the Uni of Queensland? And why is it that other countries back PsiQuantum and their brilliant founders when they invented their breakthrough technology at the Uni of Queensland as well? Enough of the goodbyes. We're enough of waving off jobs and economic opportunity. Our Future Made in Australia plan says that our brilliant inventors and investors should stay here and make it here. Tuesday's budget was the next step in that goal. For example, with the Queensland Government, we're bringing PsiQuantum home. Australians who want to build the world's first fault-tolerant quantum computer in Brisbane, and it will give our industries, our economy, the power needed to stay ahead of the pack. Quantum computing vital to both our economic and our national security. And the other thing we need to do in thinking ahead about our future prosperity is tackle the terrible state of R&D investment that we inherited from those opposite. And that's the focus of our landmark strategic review into R&D announced in the budget, because it aims to ensure we keep turning the work of our scientists and researchers into future economic strength. Now, I'm asked, what's in the way? Well, they're opposite. No plan for Australian manufacturing. The only time they talk about manufacturing is to talk it down. Always negative, always standing in the way, always no to everything. When we said yes to the National Reconstruction Fund, they said no. When we said yes to energy price relief to manufacturers, they said no. When we said yes to tax cuts for manufacturing workers, they said no. And when we said yes to a future made in Australia, they say no. So tonight there's a test for the Leader of the Opposition. Will he level with Australian manufacturing workers? Whose job is he prepared to see be sent offshore? Steel workers in the Illawarra or South Australia? Is it tech workers in Queensland? Is it defence industry workers in Western Australia? Medical manufacturing workers in Victoria? Or will he just agree with the member for Bradfield that it is absolutely the right decision to send manufacturing?
Give the call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Some families are paying up to $1,000 more for their electricity since Labor was elected 2 years ago. After 3 failed budgets, the energy rebate announced on Tuesday is finally an admission that the government broke its promise to cut energy bills. The only thing made in Australia is this inflation crisis. Why are Australian families paying the price for the Prime Minister's weak economic leadership?
Order. The Treasurer. Order. The Treasurer will cease interjecting, and the Deputy Leader has asked her question. She was heard in silence. The Prime Minister hasn't begun his answer yet. I'm sure he may get a response, but wait till he see what is said first. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, it must be interesting when they have shadow ministry meetings, because that question goes to the exact opposite of what the shadow finance minister said, where she said everybody needs $300 off their power bill. In fact, we'd like to see more. And what we've done, well, perhaps that'll be in there.
Order. The Deputy Leader has asked her question. The Deputy Leader has asked her question. The member for Casey has continued to interject. He'll cease interjecting as well.
Perhaps that will be in their announcement tonight. Apparently they're going to do multiples. Is what we've just had, a preemptive strike from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, saying that they'll do multiples of our power bill announcement in tonight's budget reply. Well, we await that. We await that, Mr Speaker, and perhaps they can move that as amendments. Because when they had the chance to support Australian families and to vote for power bill relief, they voted against it. They voted against it for families. They voted against it for small business, like they vote against everything. The problem with this opposition is that they take that word literally, opposition. They just say no to everything. They have no plans for the future, nothing positive to say about what is needed. They've had 2 budget replies without having any substantive policy whatsoever. The Leader of the Opposition can't find the National Press Club to give a serious speech about the alternative policy of the alternative government. So we await tonight the view that we will see a fully costed policy plan, because this is the 3rd budget reply. We've had strike 1, strike 2. Tonight we'll see whether it's strike 3, and I know there are many over there would like to see strike 3 and you're out.
Call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What progress has the Albanese Labor government made on getting wages moving again, and what threats are there to this progress?
The call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much. And I want to thank the member for Holt, someone who's dedicated her whole working life to getting wages moving for people in the retail industry as well. Really pleased with the results that came out today in terms of more people in jobs. More than 820,000 new jobs under the Albanese Labor government, and the majority of them full-time jobs. That happening at the exact same time that people are earning more, keeping more of what they earn, and the gender pay gap being at a record low. Australians, but at each of these times it hasn't happened by accident. It's happened because of processes from government that were changed and laws that were changed. And with every single one of them, the Leader of the Opposition has had the same response, to say no. When we argued that, and the Prime Minister argued that the lowest paid workers shouldn't go backwards, the Leader of the Opposition said no. When we said we should turn up to the Fair Work Commission to give aged care workers a pay rise, the Leader of the Opposition's position was no. When we introduced the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill, the Leader of the Opposition's position was to vote no. When we introduced the Closing Loopholes reforms, the Leader of the Opposition's position was to vote no. And when we said that every Australian taxpayer should get a tax cut, the Leader of the Opposition didn't just want to say no, he wanted to call an election over it to stop Australians, just as he tried to stop them from earning more, to try to stop them from keeping more of what they earn. He opposed the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill the moment he heard the title. And when arguing as to why he opposed it, he said, and I quote, "It's going to result in higher wages." Well, he's right. That's exactly why we did it. But if he's opposed to higher wages, and we all have already heard from them that they've got a secret plan that they want to have a targeted package of repeals, well, tonight's a chance to let people in on what they are. People have a right to know if you're going after their wages, what your secret plan of appeals will be. We only know one of them so far. He's decided to go after the right to disconnect. The Leader of the Opposition's position is you have to be available 24/7, even if you're not being paid. And I remember, and I hear the groans from those opposite, don't forget when the Secure Jobs Better Pay bill was going through, and it was likely that the Senate deliberations were going to continue, and I flagged with the parliament that we might have to return and work on the Saturday. They were outraged about having to defend their right to disconnect. But the concept that for any low-paid worker that they should have to work whether they're being paid or not, that they should be constantly on call, their view is that that's up for grabs, no matter how passionate they are about their own right to disconnect. The Leader of the Opposition is determined to cut people's pay. He has opposed everything that has delivered pay rises, and it's time tonight that he let people know what the secret plan is.
Give a call to the honourable member for McKellar.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. Minister, last week you announced your government's future gas strategy, which will put the pedal to the metal on gas production in this country. I acknowledge that existing gas production is necessary while we transition to a renewable economy. However, even Labor's own Environment Action Network said this undermines their members' confidence in your government's commitment to climate action. Minister, doesn't becoming the world's largest gas exporter completely blow all our other abatement measures out of the water?
Give a call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for McKellar for her question and for her interest in this very complex area of government policy. And I acknowledge the interest so many members in this House, right around the House and in the other place, and all their constituencies have in this issue. I want to be really clear, and I refer to your question and I refer to the future gas strategy. The Albanese government is committed to climate action and to net zero by 2050. We have legislated targets, we have reformed the safeguard mechanism, and we have committed to 82% renewables by 2030. Principle 1 of the future gas strategy is this: Australia is committed to supporting global emissions reductions to reduce the impacts of climate change and will reach net zero emissions by 2050. It is consistent because of the work this government is doing and will continue to do. Our reforms to the safeguard mechanism will drive down emissions across a range of emissions-intensive oil and gas operations, covering the emissions of 130 resource sector facilities. Any new gas fields supplying LNG facilities will be given a zero baseline allocation for the reservoir CO2 in their fields. This is law. This means that gas from any new offshore fields will be carbon neutral from the very start. Since we came to office, there's been a 25% increase in renewables in the national energy market, and this has driven both its total emissions and the emission intensity of this country to all-time record lows. We will keep driving policy and actions to make sure we hit that 82% target. And because we have done those things, we do need to carefully consider how gas fits into those net zero commitments. The future gas strategy seeks to do this through a solid evidence base after a year of work and extensive consultation. Energy security and affordability is important for households, for jobs, for manufacturing capacity and for our national prosperity. And energy security is of vital importance for our geopolitical stability of our region. The findings are very clear. The role of gas will change, and the gas emissions simply must reduce, and the use of gas is different across the nation. I would observe that for whatever point of view you want to take on this really complex issue of decarbonising the global economy while also ensuring energy security, that slogans alone will not in any way advance global net zero emissions ambitions.
Call to the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government's Homes for Australia plan improving housing in the country, and what is standing in the way?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank the member for Canberra for that question. The member for Canberra knows that Australia doesn't have enough homes, and we haven't had enough homes for a long time. That's why our budget, of course, has over $6 billion in new investments to help build new homes for Australia, Mr Speaker. This brings Labor's new housing initiatives investments to $32 billion since we came to office. $32 billion to build more homes more quickly in more places right across Australia, Mr Speaker. This is what our Homes for Australia plan is all about. Homes for Australia will help us meet our ambitious national target of building 1.2 million homes over the 5 years from 1 July, Mr Speaker. It includes funding of $9.3 billion for a new housing agreement, a 5-year agreement with the states and territories. It also includes $1 billion in new investments for necessary infrastructure and another $1 billion, of course, to support transitional and crisis accommodation for women and children fleeing family and domestic violence and for young people, Mr Speaker. We're helping nearly 1 million Australian households with $1.9 billion for the first back-to-back increase in the Commonwealth rent assistance in more than 30 years to help renters, Mr Speaker. We're working right across government to meet the housing challenges that we inherited from those opposite. In skills, we've committed more than $90 million in the budget to boost the number of tradies. We need more tradies to build more homes, Mr Speaker. In industry, we're investigating alternative methods of construction because we know we need everybody in government with their shoulder to the wheel to meet our ambitious national target of 1.2 million homes. And, Mr Speaker, an important part of that, of course, is social and affordable homes.
The Minister will pause. The member for Deakin can cease having the conversation with the Treasurer. Far too much noise. So just for the remainder of this answer, he's going to remain silent, so will the Treasurer. Otherwise, they'll both be warned. Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And of course, an important part of that is more social and affordable homes. And the Housing Australia Future Fund, of course, is 30,000 new social and affordable homes. And those opposite, of course, voted no to that, Mr Speaker. We've got targeted support with Help to Buy to get home buyers into new homes, Mr Speaker. Targeted again with 40% shared equity for new homes. Again, those opposite said no, Mr Speaker. What we need, of course, to hear from them is exactly what they're going to do. They've got this plan, Super for Homes, but what we know, of course, is that will push up home prices, and even the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Minister for Finance says that. We know it won't build one new home, and we know it will wreck people's retirement by wrecking their super, Mr Speaker. What we need to do is get on and build more homes for Australia. We're going to do that.
Order.
While we're building new homes, they're wrecking superannuation.
Give the call to the member for Flynn.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. On 22 July 2021, the Prime Minister sat in the ABC Wide Bay studio and said Paradise Dam should be fixed and should be fixed as soon as possible. On 9 March 2022, the Labor government committed to rebuilding Paradise Dam, but in the federal budget, funding to restore the dam has been cut from the National Water Grid Fund. Why is the Prime Minister breaking another promise to regional Australia?
Order. Give a call to the Minister for the Environment and order. I haven't called the minister yet. Order. The Minister for the Environment and Water has the call.
Well, I'd like to thank the member for the question, and I'd like to remind him that he is a member of a party that promised 100 dams and built two very small ones. Two very small ones.
They were puddles.
Order. Order.
More like sinks for
Order.
We will continue to invest in water infrastructure. We know it's important. We've committed $600 million to Paradise Dam. It is in the future. We're working with the Queensland government to do that.
Order. The member for Hinkler. I'd like to hear the answer.
I've seen the budget papers. Don't worry. I've looked at them very closely. Thank you. You might be interested in knowing you might be interested in knowing that one project, for example, that you never delivered on was the $30 million to build a pipeline to Mount Morgan. Yeah. Why did we do that? Because they were trucking water for 3 years. Why didn't you, in any of your 10 wasted years in office, actually deliver something for the people of Queensland?
Has the minister concluded her answer? Order. Order. The minister has concluded her answer. Order. The member for Wannon, when the House comes to order, the member for Wannon. I want to hear from the member for Tangney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government working for Middle Australia, and what are the advantages of this approach over others?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member for Tangney for treading where the Shadow Treasurer dares not, asking a question of the Treasurer in Budget Week. I'd have to ask, maybe I could ask Mr Shanahan upstairs or someone who's been around for a while, Mr Speaker, but it strikes me as a bit strange that the Shadow Treasurer in Budget Week at 3 o'clock on Thursday still hasn't asked a question of the Treasurer about the budget. But the other reason I appreciate the question from the member for Tangney, Mr Speaker, is because every single one of the 87,000 taxpayers in the member for Tangney's electorate will get a tax cut. And every one of the 70,000 households in the member's electorate will get energy bill relief, Mr Speaker. And that's because a central defining feature of the budget on Tuesday night was helping people doing it tough, Mr Speaker. Whether that's that tax cut for every Australian taxpayer, whether it's energy bill relief for every Australian household, whether it's rent assistance for almost 1 million renters, Mr Speaker, whether it's cheaper medicines for people by freezing the PBS for 5 years for people on concessions and 1 year for everyone else, and a whole range of other measures, Mr Speaker, designed to ease the cost of living and the pressures that people are under. The cost of living relief in the budget was substantial and it was responsible, and our responsible approach to make life a little bit easier for people who are under the pump differs greatly from the approach taken by those opposite, Mr Speaker. And no matter what the opposition leader says tonight, his record when it comes to Middle Australia speaks for itself. When we changed the tax cuts to make them fairer for Middle Australia and to make sure that every taxpayer got a tax cut, that they were no longer skewed to the highest income earners, he called for an election over it. Mr Speaker, he said there should be an election over it, and his deputy leader said of course they were going to unwind it, Mr Speaker. When we put into this place last time energy bill rebates for people doing it tough, they voted against it, Mr Speaker. At every turn when we've tried to boost wages in this economy after a decade of wage stagnation, they have opposed our efforts. In the parliament, Mr Speaker, we've got a simple change to make the concessions at the top end of superannuation for people with more than $3 million a little bit less concessional, and they don't support that either, Mr Speaker. They don't support our changes to get more tax sooner from offshore gas companies, Mr Speaker, and the Shadow Treasurer is calling out in his typically courageous way, far from the dispatch box, about real wages. Real wages are growing now, and they were falling under those opposite, Mr Speaker. So I say to the opposition leader, spare us the faux outrage tonight and the fake class warfare. His record speaks for itself. If he had his way, inflation would be higher, wages would be lower and Middle Australia wouldn't get a look in, Mr Speaker. And that is another reminder that his nuclear negativity is no substitute for helping Middle Australia or for the economic credibility he sought.
Give the call to the honourable member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Prime Minister. The government's Future Made in Australia announcements sound consistent with our need to decarbonise for long-term prosperity, but we need to invest in building new industries where we have a comparative advantage. Will the government commit to investment decisions under the Future Made in Australia being transparent and driven by independent expert economic analysis?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And indeed, I thank the member for Curtin for her question. I've noted her public comments supporting Future Made in Australia and making more things here. And that will be driven by the framework that will come before this parliament in legislation that the member for Curtin will have the opportunity to contribute to. Those opposite have already said they're going to vote against it. Already said they're going to vote against it. So the WA Liberal Party leader, of course, the leader of that massive group, I think there's two of them, but the leader of the Liberal Party in WA has said that she supports the Future Made in Australia agenda, as has the member for O'Connor backed it in as well. So we look forward to the member for O'Connor crossing the floor on these issues. Now,
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. I can't hear what he is saying because there is a live conversation going between the Shadow Treasurer and the Treasurer. You can both have a conversation outside. I can make that happen. But I think you'd like to stay. So you remain in silence for the remainder of this answer. You'll both be warned. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Now, this is a comprehensive plan through measures like production tax credits for hydrogen and critical minerals. We know that Australia does have a comparative advantage in green hydrogen because we'll be able to have the space to have the green hydrogen produced by clean energy, which then can be used to manufacture things like green aluminium, green steel, to give us a comparative advantage in the world. Now, the way that will work is for critical minerals, it will be 10% of eligible processing costs. For hydrogen, it will be $2 per kilogram for green hydrogen. Now, companies won't receive any credit until they have produced these resources. So that's why it's been designed in this way. So it pays on success. It pays on creating jobs. It pays on creating not just domestic use, but export potential as well. This incentive will make domestic production more cost competitive and will boost Australian industry. It will commence in the 2027-28 financial year and will support production till 2040. That's just some of the measures that we have. But here's the big tip. You can't build a future out of just saying no. And that is what those opposite are doing. The only thing the Leader of the Opposition has ever been interested in manufacturing is division. The only thing. They don't have an agenda. They don't have an agenda, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Just a vendetta. Just a vendetta. A vendetta against workers, against manufacturing, against fair wages, against aspiration and against ambition.
Prime Minister's concluded his answer. The member for Wannon on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question didn't mention the Leader of the Opposition at all, and the Prime Minister seems to be obsessed with being very negative towards.
Once again, I just want to remind anyone raising a point of order. I can appreciate the point of order on relevance, but it is just not an opportunity to make additional statements. This is really creeping into every time a point of relevance has been made with an extra grab or an extra hook or an extra statement. Speakers in the past have simply stopped taking the points of order on both sides. So, going forward, we're just going to make the point of relevance without the additional comments. The Prime Minister wasn't asked about alternative policies. He was asked about decisions being made driven by experts. At the end of the questions, I'm going to make sure his remarks are relevant for the remainder of the answer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. What a Future Made in Australia agenda is about is shaping the future, because unless you do that, the world will just go past us. We need to seize the opportunities that are happening because of the global changes in the economy. We're in a strong position to do so, but only if we seize those opportunities, and I look forward to working with the member for Curtin to do just that.
Has concluded. Call to the honourable member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering responsible cost of living relief for Australians, and what has been the response?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for making for that question. The Albanese government is delivering a responsible budget that provides cost of living help now, builds a stronger and more resilient economy and invests in a future made in Australia. And in my portfolio of social services, we are providing more assistance for those who rely on it. This includes further increasing the maximum rates of Commonwealth rent assistance, benefiting close to 1 million households, with the maximum rate of rent assistance since we were elected increasing by 42%. We will expand eligibility for the higher rate of job seeker to help those who are only able to work up to 14 hours a week, and give more flexibility to those on carers payment who want to do more work, study or volunteer. Now, we've also frozen deeming rates for a further 12 months so that part pensioners, along with other income support recipients, can keep more of what they earn on their investments. This is in addition to other cost of living relief across the government, including energy rebates for all householders, delivering cheaper medicines and, of course, giving all Australians a tax cut from the 1st of July. Now, our assistance has been welcomed by many, including groups such as the Council on the Ageing and National Seniors, with the Council on the Ageing saying that this week our rent assistance changes was welcomed by many. Unfortunately, this positive response to supporting those on payments with cost of living are not shared by those opposite. Actually, on Sunday, the member for Hume suggested he would cut so-called unrestrained spending. Now, the spending he was referring to, including the cost of indexing pensions and working age payments. These are critically important to keeping up with cost of living. Now, the Leader of the Opposition needs to come clean with the Australian people tonight. Does he agree with his Shadow Treasurer that this spending is not necessary? Now, we all know the coalition has formed when it comes to cutting support payments. Who could forget that promise? No cuts to the pensions in 2013, 2014, cuts to the pensions across the board.
The Minister will pause. The Manager of Opposition Positions on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, the Minister is trailing well into historical matters. It was a fairly narrowly drafted question, and there's simply no scope for her to be going where she is going right now.
The Manager is correct. The Minister wasn't asked about alternative approaches or in the past. She was asked about the government announcements and what has been the response. So that's not an entitlement to talk about anything that the opposition has been doing. She has the call.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I think that it's made clear by those opposite that while they have form on this, they are now seem to be signalling that they want to cut the pension again. They want to cut the pension again. And when we all know that when those opposite start talking about cutting unrestrained spending, what they mean is cuts to the pensions and other support payments. This is unacceptable. The Leader of the Opposition has to come clean with this.
Member for Hughes has the call.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Who will receive the $300 energy rebate announced in the budget? Is it A, someone who earns over $500,000 a year, B, someone who owns 3 properties, C, the Prime Minister of Australia, or D, all of the above?
Order. Order. The Minister for Skills and order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The Minister for Skills and Training will cease interjecting. When the House comes to order, the member for Hughes was heard in silence. The Prime Minister is going to be given the same courtesy. Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Hughes for her question, and tonight there'll be an opportunity to hear from the Leader of the Opposition over whether he supports the $300 going to every household. From the question from the member for Hughes, It sounds like they don't. And that wouldn't be surprising, Mr Speaker, because they opposed it when it was targeted, and now they're opposing it when it goes to every household. And this is at a time, Mr Speaker, where earlier on this year they expressed outrage that people who were going to get 9...
Order. The Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting. The member for Hughes will state a point of order.
Point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was quite targeted. It went to who will receive the $300 rebate.
Right,
went to the government's policies, not ours.
I know there were a number of subsets to the question, but the Prime Minister said very early in the answer he did confirm every household. So, order. The Prime Minister is just going to be heard in silence for the remainder.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. It was targeted at every household because they're the people who were going to benefit from our $300 for every household. It was targeted at every small business. And as well, of course, earlier this year, we had outrage expressed and we needed to go to an election for suggesting that everyone in this chamber should get $9,000 tax cut rather than $4,500 tax cut. At the same time, where workers earning under $45,000 should get exactly zero. So they can't work out where they are when it comes to class warfare, whether they're attacking the top.
The Prime Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader knows the standing orders backwards, and she knows that there won't be a point of order on relevance because that's already been taken. But she is entitled to order the Minister for Climate Change. So it's got to be a real point of order, not a statement, not a throwaway line. The Deputy Leader on a point of order.
Simply, Mr Speaker, that I seek your ruling based on your earlier response to the point on relevance. This was a tight question about eligibility criteria.
Well,
it was a question about eligibility criteria.
Resume your seat. The time to ask me that question was when I made the ruling. I made the ruling. If you were unhappy with it, you could have taken action then. To go back in time is not possible under the standing orders. Prime Minister has the calls.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Thanks very much. The fact is, they are all over the shop over there. They can't decide whether they want more or they want less, whether they want more spending or no spending, whether they want to support aspiration or attack aspiration. What we know is the one thing that is consistent about them is that they have no plan for the future. They have nothing positive to say, just nuclear negativity over and over again from this leader of the opposition and his merry band who hand out questions but aren't capable of standing up and have the courage of asking it themselves.
Call to the honourable member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. In this year's budget, how is the Albanese Labor government easing cost of living pressures for early childhood education and care workers?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Adelaide for his most excellent question and for his tireless advocacy for the early childhood educators and indeed the children in his electorate of Adelaide. And like all members of this Albanese Labor government, the member for Adelaide understands the importance of early childhood education and care for children, for families and for the economy. And unlike those opposite, we on this side value the skilled and important work that early childhood educators and early childhood teachers do. You won't hear anyone on this side of the House refer to early childhood education and care as childminding and outsourcing parenting. That's not what we do. This government
has made a historic commitment to contribute funding towards lifting the wages of early childhood education and care workers, something that I'm incredibly proud of. And indeed, Mr Speaker, watching the faces of the early childhood educators in the gallery on budget night, when the Treasurer announced a multi-billion-dollar provision in the budget for better wages in the care economy, including in the early learning sector, watching the tears flow from those early childhood educators was really something that I know touched everybody in this side of the House, the hearts of everybody in this side of the House. Now, Mr Speaker, reviews by the ACCC and the Productivity Commission have highlighted to us that we simply cannot achieve any reform, the necessary reform, in the early childhood education and care sector without a strong and sustainable workforce. And you know, you don't just need reports to tell you this. Anyone who has visited an early childhood education and care centre, whether it's the member for Adelaide or any of the members here behind me that I've had the pleasure of visiting early childhood education and care centres with, speaking to early childhood educators and carers, knows the pressure that they're under. And as one early childhood educator told me, we love what we do, but love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't pay the bills. Now, last night's budget, or the night before's budget, didn't just deliver a historical second surplus, but cost of living relief measures for all Australians. Early childhood educators will get their boost in their wages, and they'll also get a tax cut, just like every Australian taxpayer right across the country. Mr Speaker, we will continue our record of responsible fiscal management. We will continue to provide cost of living relief without adding to inflation. And we will lay the foundations for a future where all Australian children thrive, no matter who they are, no matter what their background.
The Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Flinders.
My question is to the Prime Minister. S&P Global said that the additional cost of living measures in the budget were inflationary. The Reserve Bank of Australia Governor has warned that it is very uncertain inflation will return to target in the next 2 years, and it is too early to declare victory over inflation. Former RBA board member Warwick McKibben says that claiming taxpayer-funded electricity and rental bill relief are an antidote to high inflation is a political trick that will not address economic pressures. Why are Australians paying the price for the Prime Minister's wrong priorities and bad decisions?
I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'll ask the Treasurer to add to this question, because here he is. He's handed down a budget Tuesday night. He's been waiting Tuesday, waiting Wednesday. Now we're right through Thursday, 3:15. We might keep question time going until the Shadow Treasurer has the courage to ask him a question.
Order. Order. Members on my left. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Come to the microphone, mate. Get a question. Come to the microphone's off. Your microphone's off.
Order. The Treasurer.
Your microphone's off.
The Treasurer will return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It sounds like they don't support energy bill rebates for every Australian household, Mr Speaker. And if that's the case, that question, the question before, the questions earlier on, it sounds like they don't support easing the cost of living for people doing it tough. And so, thankfully, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has the opportunity in a few hours' time to get to that dispatch box and to tell the Australian people why he thinks Australians don't deserve some help with the cost of living. Because we do. We do. We believe that Australians who are doing it tough need help with the cost of living. And that's why there's a tax cut for every taxpayer. That's why there's energy bill relief for every household. That's why there's cheaper medicines. That's why there's rent assistance, Mr Speaker. Because unlike those opposite, we are here to represent the interests of Middle Australia, and we know that Middle Australia is doing it tough. And we know, Mr Speaker, that when we came to office, inflation had a 6 in front of it, and now it has a 3 in front of it. Now those opposite who are talking about inflation with a 3 in front of it, which is still too high, with a 3 in front of it, I'd love to hear how they describe inflation with a 6 in front of it, which is what they left behind when they stacked up in the budget. bigger deficits and more debt and all of these stupendous waste and rorts, which meant that this country had almost nothing to show from $1 trillion in Liberal debt, Mr Speaker. And so if they describe the situation now, which is a couple of $100 billion better, where we've turned Liberal deficits into Labor surpluses, I'd love to hear how they describe the situation that they left, the mess that they left behind, Mr Speaker, that we have spent a big chunk of our 2 years in office cleaning up, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the good people, the working people of Middle Australia, the people on pensions, indeed all Australians, Mr Speaker. Now, the honourable member asks me about the Reserve Bank and the view that the job, when it comes to fighting inflation, isn't over yet. We agree with that. We agree with that, Mr Speaker. It's not mission accomplished on inflation, which is why the budget is focused on easing the cost of living and fighting inflation to clean up the mess they left behind.
Give the call to the Chief Government Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How does the Albanese Labor government's budget ensure we have the skilled workers we need to build more homes, create a future made in Australia and successfully move to a net zero economy? And why is supporting the vet sector so important after a wasted decade?
Call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Yep. Thanks very much, Speaker. Can I thank the member for Lawler for her question? She understands, as well as anybody in this place, how important education and training is for people. And I think it's clear that if we don't invest in education and training, we're not going to deliver what we need to. In less than 2 years, the Albanese Labor government has enacted big reforms and deepened our investment in education and training. We've created Jobs and Skills Australia, advising government and industry to supply skills to transition our energy sector, to build more homes and infrastructure and rebuild manufacturing, to provide care for older Australians and provide education to our preschool kids. The fact is, Speaker, we're going to continue to do more. Speaker, 355,000 Australians enrolled in fee-free TAFE in last year alone, and a further 320,000 fee-free TAFE places are available from this year on, and that is absolutely vital. We've struck a national skills agreement with state and territories, the first national skills agreement in a decade, a $30 billion investment in the vet sector over 5 years. Centres of excellence will be created, bringing TAFEs and universities together, more higher apprenticeships, improving foundation skills and more. And in the university sector, Minister Clare, in response to the Accord review, is implementing landmark reforms to ensure we have a more skilled and more knowledgeable workforce. Speaker, the fact is the budget handed down by the Treasurer on Tuesday is going to provide much relief for people in this country, but will also be investing in skills that our workers and businesses and our economy need. And of course, starting with on the 1st of July, every Australian taxpayer will get a tax cut, and every household in this country will get $300 off their electricity bill. And as for skills, we reversed the savage cuts made by those opposite by removing apprenticeship support exactly at the time you don't do that. We've actually ensured we've increased support for apprentices as a result of this budget. We've added a further 20,000 fee-free TAFE places in the housing and construction sector to supply more housing. And we will invest a further $90 million, and I'll be working with the Minister for Energy on this, in the clean energy workforce to establish a national hydrogen skills training centre. All of this is directed to ensure we have a future made in Australia. By contrast, those opposite cut apprenticeship support, spoke out against tax cuts, called fee-free TAFE wasteful spending. Tonight the opposition leader has a test. He either will outline a plan for Australia's future or make it perfectly clear he will play no part in it.
Call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Can the minister confirm that under his watch bulk billing has fallen 11% since the Albanese Labor government came to office?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Ask us about
What I can confirm, Mr. Speaker, and I've said this publicly on many occasions, is that when we came to government, bulk billing was in free fall. particularly for GP consults. And there's no surprise why it was in freefall, Mr Speaker, because under the worst health minister in the Medicare era, a years-long Medicare rebate freeze was put in place that was then continued by the second worst health minister in the Medicare era, the member for Farrer. The member for Farrer. So yes, the bulk billing rate was in decline when we came to office.
The Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Ruling on whether the minister's answer is in order.
Relevant or order? Well, he's being in order because he's not saying anything offensive or so. He would be not in order if he He would not be in order if he was abusing the standing orders. So he's in order. Yeah. It's not about what I prefer, but it's up to you. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the call.
And ask for a point of order on relevance.
Okay.
The question was completely specific, Minister. Completely one-word answer.
Well, I think the Deputy Leader knows that under the standing orders I can't make or demand him answer a question of a yes or a no or a figure or we've been around this block before. He's got to remain directly relevant. He is in order. He's been talking about bulk billing rates. He can't spend all of his answer talking about previous rates. We can do some compare and contrast, obviously, to talk about. We'll need to get to the rates under his term as Minister, and I'll give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think what I was saying before was that, yes, from the time we came to government, I'd been saying that I was deeply concerned about bulk billing rates, particularly for GP consults, because they were in freefall. And if you asked any doctor or any doctors' group the reason why they were in freefall, it was that Medicare rebates had been frozen for 6 long years, initially by the worst health minister in Australia's history, now the Leader of the Opposition, and a freeze continued by the second worst health minister in Australian history, now the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. And on Tuesday night, we introduced the second biggest increase to the Medicare rebate across the board in the last 30 years. The biggest increase to the Medicare rebate in the last 30 years was last year. And over just 2 years, we've increased the Medicare rebate by twice as much as those Optus managed in 9 long years. 9 long years. So, yes, I've been very honest about the fact that from the time I came to office as the Health Minister and had the privilege of being appointed to that portfolio by the Prime Minister, bulk billing has been in decline. Doctors could not hang on any longer after the freeze imposed by those opposite. I made no bones about that. And I published much more transparent data about bulk billing than was published by those opposite. Very clear data about GP NRAs and bulk billing rates, not by state, nationally and by electorate. And the member for Farrer, I'm sure, has examined that. What I will say, though, is when our bulk billing incentives took effect on the 1st of November, the bulk billing rate has started to climb again. Since that date, in 1st of November, there have been 950,000 additional free visits to the doctor. The bulk billing rate has increased by over 2% in just 5 months. So, yes, there's much more work to do, but we've started fixing the mess that was started by the Leader of the Opposition and continued by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the 2 worst health ministers in the Medicare era.
Order. I'd like to hear from the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Minister, how will the additional investment in Medicare urgent care clinics, which was announced in the budget, make it easier for Australians to see a doctor after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Good question. Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the terrific member for Lingiari because she and the member for Solomon, I tell you, are a formidable team, constantly pressing the case for better health care in the Territory, like the second rescue helicopter and the second plane that we've been able to deliver to Care Flight to ensure year-round coverage for the Northern Territory, and finally delivering a medical school at CDU for the Territory, which was pressed by both members. But I want to acknowledge the relentless advocacy by the member for Solomon for that project which we delivered in this week's budget. Now, the member for Lingiari, Mr Speaker, also promised at the last election an urgent care clinic for Alice Springs, and she has delivered that project. It's being operated by the legendary Congress organisation, and it's already seen several thousand patients, all fully bulk billed, like Billy, a young 16-year-old First Nations man who was taken to the clinic by ambulance. He was feverish, he was unsteady on his feet, because he had an infection between his shoulder and his neck that had swollen to the size of a tennis ball, Mr Speaker. He was tested, he had intravenous antibiotics, he had fluids and pain relief, and was then released home to be brought back in for ongoing wound care. And we all know, Mr Speaker, without that he would have ended up in the Alice Springs Hospital. And across Australia there have been 400,000 patients seen in clinics right across the country, delivering fully bulk billed urgent care and taking that pressure off the hospital system. And this budget this week delivered 29 more clinics, which will be rolled out across the country. But beyond urgent care, as I just said in response to the member for Farrer's question, bulk billing has started to climb as well, by 4% for GP visits in the member for Lingiari's electorate. And for Labor, that's important. For us, that's important. We know for not everyone is that important. We remember when the Leader of the Opposition said as Health Minister there are too many free Medicare services. We remember when he tried to abolish bulk billing altogether, Mr Speaker, because I'm asked about the decade of cuts and neglect, and it started 10 years ago this week, when the Leader of the Opposition delivered the worst health budget in Australian history. A very big reason, I'm sure, why Australia's doctors voted him the worst health minister in the Medicare era. But it wasn't just the doctors, Mr Speaker. It wasn't just the doctors. He didn't last 15 months before being punted from the health portfolio by Tony Abbott, Mr Speaker, not 15 months. And let's be frank, you've got to be going pretty badly before Tony Abbott considers you a political liability.
Order. Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm reluctant to cut off the Shadow Treasurer. If he has a question for the Treasurer, we can keep going, or we can...
Order.
I want to give you a chance.
Order.
I want to give you a chance, Gus. If not, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order. The House will come to order. The member for Kooyong has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. Mr Speaker, I have a question for you. I wish to seek a clarification on the rules regarding fundraisers in Parliament House. In October 2022, the Prime Minister wrote to you and the President of the Senate, and he then requested that political fundraisers in bookable spaces in the building be banned. At that time, both you and the President of the Senate agreed to that ban. Now, there are reports this week that some members have charged between $1,000 and $2,000 a ticket for budget reply fundraising events within Parliament House, despite that rule change. These reports are concerning. In 2022, the Prime Minister said that he was seeking this change because the dignity of Parliament House should be maintained. In my opinion, members hosting fundraisers within the Parliament House offices wilfully disregards your 2022 ruling, and it does compromise the dignity of this House. Could you please clarify for members what are the rules regarding fundraisers within Parliament House?
I had anticipated that this question would come forward as a result of media coverage, but I want to remind all members that the member is correct. On the 17th of October, myself and the President did change the policy for bookable areas in Parliament House. When parliamentarians have made bookings for events, they now must declare that the event is not for the purpose of political fundraising, complies with this policy. Political fundraising cannot take place in the bookable areas of Parliament House. I made these policy changes for practical implementation so that political fundraising could not occur. I want to advise that all individual members are, and request them, that respect this policy. It's my personal view that political fundraising does not occur in this place. The dignity of the parliament must always be maintained in line with the Australian public's expectation. Before members leave the House, I want to give a short reminder about arrangements for this evening with respect to the Leader of the Opposition's budget reply speech. As I outlined on Tuesday, the usual courtesies apply to the Leader of the Opposition's speech, as they did to the Treasurer's. With respect to this evening, the Leader of the Opposition will have the call and is entitled to speak without interruption. As with the Treasurer's speech on Tuesday, Standing Order 1 provides that there is no time limit for the Leader of the Opposition's speech. The clock is used only as a guide. As I noted on Tuesday, if I am required to make use of Standing Order 94A, the member will be advised by written note. Finally, I ask all members to ensure that their guests comply with the standards of behaviour applying to the galleries, and I remind all members that they are responsible for their invited guests. I thank the House. The member for Groom has indicated he is seeking the call.
In accordance with Standing Order 105B, I wish to draw your attention to an overdue question in writing, question 475. The question related to the negative impacts of this Labor government's economic policies on young people in my electorate of Groom. Mr Speaker, can I ask that you write to the Treasurer and speak explanation as to why he has chosen not to answer my question in writing within 60 days?
I shall write to the Minister as the standing orders prevail. I present the Speaker's response to certain recommendations of the report of the Standing Committee on Procedure entitled Raising the Standard, Inquiry into Recommendations 10 and 27 of the Set the Standard Report on the Independent Review into Commonwealth Parliamentary Workplaces. The Leader of the House.
Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.